Alright, so in this tutorial I'm just going to walk you through building a pretty simple means of relaying some sort of error message or success message to a user. Now there's a lot of ways to go about this. You may want to go the AJAX route, or you may not want to go the AJAX route. So this example is going to not necessarily be going the AJAX route. I can cover that in a different video, but this is a bit more of an advanced tutorial focused on PHP. So if we wanted to strictly do this using PHP, then we're going to build a little class that is going to be actually very helpful to do this, and it's not very difficult either. This is just a very simplified version of a much larger, more complex class that I've built previously for a project that I'm working on, but I'll walk you through the steps from the start. What I have here is two different files. I have index.php. So we just have a simple form on this page here, just asking for a few things. If we look at our localhost web server, we have just asking for a name, a color, and a season, and then our action of that form takes us to process.php. So we have a little process.php file which takes in the information, does something with it, and then it redirects us to our index.php file. So if we go over here and we just type in some random things and press submit, now it looks like it just reset the form, but it actually took us through our process.php file. If we were to add a little die statement here, we'll see that it's actually working correctly, and it takes us to process.php. But what we want to do is give us a means of showing the user that something has just happened, that the information has been processed. And there are a number of ways to go about this, but some of them could be a bit messy. It would entail adding extra stuff in your query string, which doesn't ever look good to the end user. So we're going to completely avoid anything in our query string so that the end user doesn't see any extra parameters or anything that they don't need to see. However, we do still want to keep our two pages separate for whatever reason within our application. We want to process it separately and then redirect the user back to that page or any other page. By separating our process from the form itself, we actually make it a little bit easier for us to prevent any accidental duplicate form submissions, because now that we've redirected to here, if we refresh it, it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't resubmit the form, it just refreshes a brand new empty form. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm using Dreamweaver, but you can use any editor of your choice, and we're going to just remove this basic code that Dreamweaver starts us with, and this is going to be our class file to help us handle all of this. So we're just going to save this. I recommend using some actual organization to your structure, but these are the only few files that we need for this project, so we'll just save it in the root of this directory. I'm going to call it status message, and then we're going to create a new class called status message. Now, the way that we're going to do this does require the use of sessions, so because we don't have it anywhere else in our script, we're going to add our session start to the top of this file. However, that's probably something that you would want to include in the individual files or in a different include that's going to be included. I'm going to go back into both of these, and at the very top I'm just going to add a PHP require once status message. And then we'll duplicate that into here. And in our status message class, we're going to create a couple public static functions. So we'll do a public static function, and then we'll call this one create, with a message parameter and a type parameter, and then we'll create another one called a public static function display, and then we'll create another one called reset. So we've made some static methods. These are going to help us to actually implement and use this class. But we're also going to create some non-static methods. We're going to create some protected properties, and the first one's going to be called message. The second one's going to be called type. And the third one's going to be called date. And actually, sorry, I'm going to make those, just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to make these public and not create a bunch of getter and setter methods to make this a bit quicker. And then we're going to create a public function called toArray, and that will return an array containing our properties. We're going to create a protected static property called messages, and this is going to be an array. Alright, so in our create method, we're going to create an instance of our status message object. We'll call it so msg equals new status message, and then we'll set our parameters, and then we'll set our properties of this message. So we can change this to 0 by default since we're using the time function. And then we're going to add this new instance to our messages array. We're going to create another function, public static function called save. This is going to actually make the session status messages variable into a new array, which means every time we call save, it resets this session variable. And then we're going to loop through our messages and add each message to the to that session variable. Actually, sorry, we're going to add each messages to array method, and then at the end of our create method here, we'll call self save. We're going to create a constructor as well for this, and we're going to allow it to take in an optional parameter called r. If isArray r, then we're going to end up setting these parameters based on whatever's inside of there. We're going to create an additional method here now called load. A public static function called load, and what this is going to do, loop through the session variable status messages, see if there's any messages that need to be displayed, and it's going to load those into our static messages array. To do that, we're going to first check to see if the session variable is an array. If it is, we're going to loop through the values of that array, and we're going to create a new status message object from each value of that array, and then we're going to insert that into our self messages array. We're also going to, at the top of this function, reinitialize our self messages array as an empty array, just so that we don't create any duplicate messages if load gets called multiple times. And then at the bottom of the script, outside of our class, we are going to add a call to status message load. This will just mean that every time this file gets included, it's going to automatically load any messages that need to be displayed. So now we're creating a message. We can save the messages into our session. We can load the messages from our session. Now we're going to work on our display and reset methods. So for our display method, what we're going to do is it's going to assume that everything is already loaded. It's going to loop through whatever messages exist in our static messages array, and it's going to display them. We're just going to use a Bootstrap alert as our class, and this type parameter that we've been including is just going to be an additional Bootstrap class that can be added to determine what type of alert, such as alert danger or alert success, something like that. In this method, we're going to loop through our static messages array, and display one for each of those messages that are currently in the session. To do that, we're going to also create a public static function called display message. This will handle creating each individual message, whereas display loops through the messages and shows all of them. We are going to require that this message parameter be an instance of the status message class, so a status message object, in order for this to work. And all that this is going to do is return a div with our Bootstrap alert and then whatever other CSS class that we pass it into the type, and then it will include the message inside of this div. So now we're going to loop through the messages, and we're going to create just an HTML string here, append to that HTML string for each message. So we'll do self display message message, and then this will return the HTML. After we finish looping through all of our available messages, we do want to call our self reset. That way we can get rid of the messages that have already been displayed, and we're not going to see any duplicates. So in our self reset, we're going to clear our session variable. We'll just set it to an empty array, and then we'll also clear our messages by setting it to an empty array. So we're going to try implementing this now. We're going to head over to our index.php, and right here inside of our form container, we're just going to echo status message display. Just to make sure everything's happy and not giving us any errors. We'll refresh that. I'm just going to turn off error reporting because that little notice doesn't matter. And in our process page, we will now do a status message call to the static class create, and our message is going to be you've submitted the form, and our type will be alert success. So we'll refresh, we'll try this out, press submit, and now we have our you've submitted the form message. When we refresh, that message is now gone. So there's nothing in the query string to make the user see anything extra. It shows it once. Once we've shown it once, it resets. Of course, if we had any reason why there was an error, we could say there is an error with your request. And now to test out our error, we now see that it says there's an error with your request, and again we can reset and that goes away. It only happens once we submit the form and we refresh it and it's gone. So that is a quick tutorial on how to create just a very simple way of displaying to the user a message that what I like about this is, first of all, it's very clean. It allows you to make it very simple to display a message or an error to the user. It doesn't require adding anything to the query string. What I also like about this is that you can then use multiple files. Our index.php could be where the form is. It processes on the process.php, and it could even send or redirect the user to a third page or third file where now they've entered the site or something else has happened. And so this allows us to simply, by echoing status message display on any page where we want the user to see the messages or the errors, simply by echoing status message display on any page where we would want the user to see any messages or errors that they've encountered. This will pull from whichever messages are currently needing to be displayed. It will reset them once they've been displayed. It will prevent the user from seeing duplicate messages, and it's just a very handy, easy to use tool. There are also many ways that you can expand upon this class. The implementation that I first created and am using in a project that I'm working on is a bit more complex than this, has a lot more to it, and it also uses constants for the type rather than the Bootstrap CSS names. So by introducing constants for the type, then it makes it a little bit easier to down the road change what CSS styles are being used, or changing the formatting, because it's all managed within this class and not in all the pages where you're using it. But using this is really simple, easy to implement, and allows you to create these different messages pretty quickly and easily. So I hope that this tutorial has helped you, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those comments in the comments below. If you found this tutorial helpful, I would appreciate a like or a share or a subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.